Hi, everyone. This is Mrs. Freege, and today we are going to be building on what you learned yesterday about two parallel lines cut by a transversal in order to find the measure of missing angles. So, our learning target for today says I can find the measure of missing angles when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. And so, yesterday, like I said, you learned a little bit about the different angle relationships that exist when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. So, we're going to review those today and then think about how we can use those parallel lines and transversals to find the measure of all of the missing 8 angles that are formed when we have that in a diagram. So, okay, so the first thing that I want to review is. Um, that when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, we get some sets of vertical angles. And so if I look here, I can see that this angle here and this angle here are vertical angles. And so the measures of those angles are congruent, they are the same. Down here, we also have this angle that is red and this angle here that are vertical, so they are congruent. And something important I want to remind you about when we're dealing with the red angles here are that these red angles are acute. And you'll remember that acute means they measure less than 90 degrees. So we would never want to get a measurement there that's greater than 90 degrees. And I usually remember that because typically you hear people refer to baby animals or babies that are really small as being cute. So I think about acute being small or less than 90 degrees. Now, if you look at the purple angles that I've marked here, here is one, and you can see that this angle right here is vertical, and so these two purple angles are congruent. Same thing down here. We have a purple angle with its vertical angle, and those two purple angles are vertical and congruent. Again, something to keep in mind about these angles is that these are obtuse angles. And we should remember that obtuse angles always measure greater than 90 degrees. So we would never want to get a measurement there that is anything beside being greater than 90. So again, when we have our two parallel lines cut by a transversal, we get these sets of vertical angles that are congruent to one another. When we have parallel lines cut by a transversal, we also get these adjacent angles. And you'll remember that adjacent angles mean that they are next to one another. They're kind of like next door neighbors. And so here we have our red angle. And right next to that red angle, we have a purple angle. They share a vertex and they share this common side that you can see. And you can also probably tell by looking at them that they form a straight line here. And so because of that, you'll see down here that I said the red angle plus the purple angle equal 180 degrees because they are supplementary. So any adjacent angles, you can see that down here as well. Here's a purple angle. This red angle right beside it is adjacent next to, and they form a straight line together. So they are supplementary. The last relationship that I want to talk about that's super important is that when parallel lines are cut by a transversal, the following corresponding angles are congruent. And this term corresponding, I really think about that as meaning they match up with each other. So if you look at our diagram here, you can kind of see that if I were to look here, I have one set of angles around that intersection. And then I have another set of angles here around this lower intersection. But if you look closely at them, they're set up exactly the same. So that's good news for us because we know that this purple angle up here is exactly the same measurement of this purple angle down here. Likewise, this red angle up here measures the exact same as this red angle down here. Try to mark all of these for you. Down here, we have this blue angle, That measures exactly the same as the blue angle down here. We have our green angle over here, which measures the exact same as this green angle here. And I'll mark the purple one that I mentioned first. Here's our purple angle here, and that corresponds with that purple angle down here. And so what's really helpful about this is that the angles that correspond or match up to one another are congruent. They measure the exact same. So let's dig in and see how this might help us as we begin to find the measurement of these unknown angles. So let's start with the easiest one first. And I think that vertical angles are the easiest. So I see this angle right here has already been marked as 40 degrees. So I ask myself, what other angles can I figure out that are also 40 degrees? Well, take a look at this angle. Angle F is vertical. So if this angle measures 40 degrees, then angle F is going to measure 40 degrees. I have no other vertical angles here, but I do have corresponding angles. So let's look at which angles on the top correspond with the angles here on the bottom. So here I have a 40-degree angle. If I come up here, I see angle B is corresponding, which means that is also going to be 40 degrees. Here I had angle F, so let's figure out which one is corresponding to angle F. So we come up to the top, I trace this angle here, angle C, which corresponds to angle F, so I know that that is also going to be 40 degrees. So now I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add my 40 degrees for angle B, 40 degrees for angle C, and we said that angle F was 40 degrees. Now what's cool about this are two different things really. There's only two different measurements here that we're ever going to have, and it's kind of like a puzzle. So once we start to fill in the different angles, we can start to figure out more and more as we go. So I need to use that idea of supplementary angles here now. So what I want you to do is choose an angle on this diagram that would be supplementary to angle 40. What do you think? What would be an angle that is supplementary to angle 40? Okay, so you actually had two answer choices here. You could have said that the 40-degree angle is supplementary to angle E. It is also supplementary to angle G, right? Because they're adjacent. So then I have to think about adjacent angles measure 180 degrees. If this angle right here measures 40 degrees, what is going to be left over for its supplement? Well, 180 minus 40 is going to give me 140 degrees. So I know that this is 140 degrees. Now I'm going to use that same idea of vertical angles and corresponding angles to fill in the rest of my angles here. So angle G and angle E are vertical. So I know that angle E is 140 degrees. And then I know that angle A is congruent to angle E, which means it's going to be 140 degrees. And angle D right here is congruent to angle G. So this is going to be 140 degrees. And so now I found all the measures of my missing angles. I'm going to go ahead and fill in my chart over here. Measure of angle E is 140. And the measure of angle G is also 140. And so there you have it. You solved the puzzle. Let's try another one together. Take a look at this example. It says find the measure of the missing angles below. So the first thing we want to do is look at the angle that they give us. So it looks like here they have given us this angle as measuring 165 degrees. So the first thing I want to look at is the easiest, which angle is vertical to this 165-degree angle? And that would be angle B. So right now, go ahead and find the measure of angle B? If you said 165 degrees, you would be correct because these are vertical angles. So the measure of B is 165. Now let's think about what other angles could we fill in right now, knowing these two angles measure 165 degrees. Let's look for their corresponding angles. Which angle on the diagram corresponds to this 165-degree angle? So you should have said angle F, which means that if angle F is corresponding, it measures 165 degrees. Okay. Which angle is corresponding to angle B? You should have said angle E. And you could also remember that here, angle F and angle E are also vertical angles. Okay, so we've got our first set of angles here. Let's go ahead and add them to our chart. 165, F is 165. Okay, so now the last thing that we need to do is figure out these last sets of angles here. So how could I use the 165? Well, I need to look for angles that are supplementary, and I can pick any set that I want. So I'm just going to, for the heck of it, pick angles B and C because those are supplementary. If angle B and C are supplementary, that means that they add up to 180 degrees. And I already know that one of those angles is 165 degrees. So go ahead and see if you could figure out what would be the measure of angle C. So when I go ahead and subtract 180 minus 165, I'm left with 15, which means that angle C would measure 15 degrees. Go ahead and see if you could find the measure of the last remaining angles, angle A, angle D, and angle G. Okay, so one of the first things I saw here was that angle C and angle A are vertical. So if C measures 15 degrees, this one over here is going to be 15 degrees. And then I could come down here and find those corresponding angles on my diagram down here. So we know that D is 15 degrees and G is 15 degrees. And again, you'll notice there are only two different measurements on this diagram. I have an obtuse angle and I have an acute angle. The obtuse angles all measure 165. The acute angles all measure 15. So you can see once you get going, it can be kind of easy to find all the remaining angles. Let's see if you can try one last one on your own. Go ahead and see if you can find the measures of missing angles A through G. Now, this diagram's a little slanted, so you can turn your head a little bit, but it's going to be the same thing. Two different angle measures. Use what you know about vertical angles, corresponding angles, and supplementary angles. Okay, so as you were working, you should have been able to go in here and realize that the first one I bet you filled out would be this one, right? That's an obtuse angle, that's vertical. And then if I look at my corresponding angles, right, I have angle A up here, which is also going to be 105. And vertical to that, I have angle D, which is also going to be 105. And that is it for my obtuse angles. So let me grab a different color here. Then I'm looking at my supplementary angles here. So if I have a measure that's already 105, I'm going to take 180 and I'm going to subtract 105, which is going to leave me with 75, which is going to make all of my acute angles 75. The only thing you have to be really careful of, I'm adding these numbers in here really quickly because I've done a lot of this before, but make sure that when you're adding these angles in here, that you're really being careful, that you're not mixing up acute and obtuse, that you're not mixing up corresponding angles, because you can do all of this work and then label them all wrong. So it's definitely something that once you get the hang of it, you still want to be very careful of. And so I'm going to go ahead and label these all in here. Hopefully your answers matched up to mine. You can see once you get going, it's kind of easy. It's kind of fun, I think. Okay, so in any case, let's quickly summarize our lesson here. So today we talked about how we can find the missing angles when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. These bullets are all really important things that you need to remember. So 1, vertical angles that are formed are all congruent or equal to one another. Adjacent angles that are next to one another are supplementary. They add up to 180. Corresponding angles that match up to one another on the top and the bottom are also congruent or equal to one another. And we can use these angle relationships to determine the measure of all 8 angles that are formed when two parallel lines are cut by a transversal. Thanks for your work today on lesson 8.10. If you have any questions, make sure that you reach out to one of us. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you tomorrow.